people demand freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought which they seldom use. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Be that self which one truly is. Don't forget to love yourself. The tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself. Our life always expresses the result of our dominant thoughts. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Patience is necessary, and one cannot reap immediately where one has sown. The highest and most beautiful things in life are not to be heard about, nor read about, nor seen, but, if one will, are to be lived. Boredom is the root of all evil, the despairing refusal to be oneself. God creates out of nothing. Wonderful, you say. Yes, to be sure, but he does what is still more wonderful. He makes saints out of sinners. Life has its own hidden forces which you can only discover by living. If I am capable of grasping God objectively, I do not believe, but precisely because I cannot do this I must believe. Face the facts of being what you are, for that is what changes what you are. Take away paradox from the thinker and you have a professor. Purity of heart is to will one thing. There is nothing with which every man is so afraid as getting to know how enormously much he is capable of doing and becoming. Love does not alter the beloved, it alters itself. Trouble is the common denominator of living. It is the great equalizer. The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays. I feel as if I were a piece in a game of chess, when my opponent says of it, that piece cannot be moved. The more a man can forget, the greater the number of metamorphoses which his life can undergo. The more he can remember, the more divine his life becomes. People understand me so poorly that they don't even understand my complaint about them not understanding me. Once you label me, you negate me. Most men pursue pleasure with such breathless haste that they hurry past it. At the bottom of enmity between strangers lies indifference. It was completely fruitless to quarrel with the world, whereas the quarrel with oneself was occasionally fruitful and always, she had to admit, interesting. During the first period of a man's life, the greatest danger is not to take the risk. Far from idleness being the root of all evil, it is rather the only true good. It is so hard to believe because it is so hard to obey. Marriage brings one into fatal connection with custom and tradition, and traditions and customs are like the wind and weather, altogether incalculable. Because of its tremendous solemnity, death is the light in which great passions, both good and bad, become transparent, no longer limited by outward appearances. Love is all, it gives all, and it takes all. It belongs to the imperfection of everything human that man can only attain his desire by passing through its opposite. The truth is a snare, you cannot have it without being caught. You cannot have the truth in such a way that you catch it, but only in such a way that it catches you. Personality is only right when a man has made the truth his own. I begin with the principle that all men are bores. Surely no one will prove himself so great a bore as to contradict me in this. Since my earliest childhood, a barb of sorrow has lodged in my heart. As long as it stays, I am ironic. If it is pulled out, I shall die. Faith is the highest passion in a human being. Many in every generation may not come that far, but none comes further. There are, as is known, insects that die in the moment of fertilization. So it is with all joy. Life's highest, most splendid moment of enjoyment is accompanied by death. Old age realizes the dreams of youth. Look at Dean Swift. In his youth he built an asylum for the insane. In his old age he was himself an inmate. It seems essential, in relationships and all tasks, that we concentrate only on what is most significant and important. There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, the other is to refuse to believe what is true. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. One can advise comfortably from a safe port. The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. I found I had less and less to say, until finally, I became silent and began to listen. I discovered in the silence the voice of God. People settle for a level of despair they can tolerate and call it happiness. It is not the path which is the difficulty, rather, it is the difficulty which is the path. A man prayed, and at first he thought that prayer was talking. But he became more and more quiet until in the end he realized prayer is listening. It is not where we breathe, but where we love, that we live. For without risk there is no faith, and the greater the risk, the greater the faith. The minority is always stronger than the majority, because the minority is generally formed by those who really have an opinion. Are you not aware that there comes a midnight hour when everyone must unmask? The object of Christian faith is not the teaching but the teacher. It is better to try something and fail than to try nothing and succeed. The result may be the same, but you won't be. We always grow more through defeats than victories. Christ has not only spoken to us by his life, but has also spoken for us by his death. What if everything in the world were a misunderstanding? What if laughter were really tears? The unhappy person is never present to themselves because they always live in the past or the future. Confidence is the present tense of hope. To be a woman is something so strange, so confusing and so complicated that only a woman could put up with it. Wherever there is a crowd, there is untruth. Once you are born in this world, you're old enough to die. The deepest form of despair is to choose to be another than himself. Happiness is the greatest hiding place for despair. God creates everything out of nothing. And everything which God is to use, he first reduces to nothing.